Welcome to the Photoshop training channel. In this tutorial, we're going to take a look at how to create the engraved look in a $100 bill. We'll start out with this blank bill, and we'll use the same photo that we used in the Young to Old tutorial. Then, we'll use various layers containing different patterns of lines of different widths to create the engrave effect. Okay guys, let's get started. The first thing we'll do is go through the starter file, and I'll go through each layer so you can see what we're starting with. The first thing we have is just a gray background. The background's set to 50% gray, and I've added a radial gradient to it so we can have a highlight in the middle and a shadow on the side. Then we have this group here called bill, and it's just an image of a $100 bill and this oval here helping us make the shadow underneath the bill. You'll also notice that I removed President Franklin from the bill, and this is where we're going to add our image. And the last image in our starter file is a picture of me. This is the same image that we use in the Young to Old tutorial, where I made myself look about 80 years old. If you haven't seen that tutorial, it's a very good one, so I would recommend checking it out. But anyway, these are the files that make up our starter file, and they will be available to you at photoshoptrainingchannel.com. Just look for this tutorial on my website. So the first thing we need to do is we have to create the lines that are going to make up the engravement of this image. I'll first bring in the files that I've already created so you can see what they look like and how they work, and then I'll show you how to make them. I think you'll understand it better that way. So first I'll go into File, Place, and I have these Adobe Illustrator files here. I'm going to click on the 01 very light.ai file and click on Place. Then I get this Place window, and I'm just going to click OK. Then I can either hit Enter on my keyboard or hit this check mark here, the Commit to Transform button, to accept the placement of this new layer. And just so you can see this a little bit better, I've added a white color overlay to this layer. And as you can see, this layer that we brought in is nothing more than a bunch of dashes following a wave pattern. I'm going to zoom back out, I'm going to zoom back to fit to screen, and I'm going to bring in one more layer. File, Place, 02 light, click on Place, press OK, and hit Enter on your keyboard, and this brings in a file that's very similar to the last, but this file does not have any dashes. They're just long continuous lines in a wave pattern. I'm going to click on Fit to Screen once again, and I'm going to bring in one more file. File, Place, 03 medium, click on Place, press OK. Then press on Enter on your keyboard, and if you zoom in, you'll see that this file and the previous file are very similar. One's just slightly darker than the other. But what we're going to do with this file is go into Edit, Transform, Flip Horizontal, and you'll see that this helps us create this hatch look that dollar bills have. And that's what we're going to use to create the hatch look. So I'm going to click on Fit to Screen, and I'm going to just add to this layer the word flip, just so I can remember that I flipped this layer horizontally. Okay, now that you have a rough understanding of how these files are going to work, I'm going to go into Adobe Illustrator and show you how I created these files. Now, if you don't have Adobe Illustrator, don't worry, it's not that big of a deal. I'm going to have these files available to you on my website on a .png format, so don't worry about it. But I know that some of you have Adobe Illustrator, and you guys would want to know how I created these files. So let's move on to Adobe Illustrator. Okay, so here we are in Adobe Illustrator. The first thing you're going to need to do is create a new file. So go into File, New, and create a file that's exactly the same width and height as your Adobe Photoshop file that you were working on. In my case, it's 1080 by 720. Then press OK. Then click on your line tool and make sure that you have no foreground color and that your stroke is set to black. Then click and drag from the edge of the canvas to the other edge, and you'll notice on the tooltip that that's 1080 pixels, which is exactly what we want. Then I'm going to set the width of the stroke to 0.75 points. Then I'm going to open up my layers panel, and I'm going to click and drag on this layer into the new layer icon to duplicate it. Then I'm going to hold Shift and press down, which moves the line 10 pixels down. Then I'm going to move it up 2 pixels, which will create a gap of 8 pixels. Okay, then what we're going to do is we're going to select both lines. And by the way, notice that each of these layers have a preview, have an icon of what's included in that layer, and you can kind of see the line here and the other line here. So once both our lines are selected, press Ctrl G, and that will move both lines onto the top layer. Notice that the preview icon at the bottom no longer shows that line, and if you squint, you can kind of see the two lines right there. So then this bottom layer we don't need anymore, so we can just click on the trash icon to trash that layer. We can click on this layer and duplicate it, and we'll do the same thing. We'll move it down, align it with the last line at the bottom, hold shift down and press up twice, and it creates another set of lines with an 8 pixel gap. We'll do the same thing. We'll select both layers, press Ctrl G, duplicate the top layer, bring that top layer down and align it with the last line, hold shift down arrow, and then hit the up arrow twice. Select the two top layers once again, press Ctrl G, and you can delete the two bottom layers. Okay, so I'm not going to waste too much of your time by repeating this process over and over again. So what I'll do now is I'll pause the video, and once I filled out the canvas with horizontal lines, I'll come back to you guys. Okay guys, I'm back. I've gone ahead and filled out the entire canvas with a bunch of horizontal lines following the same technique I just showed you, and I ended up with just one layer with all the lines. Now you might notice that I've gone ahead and created way more lines than I needed to, and that's because I just wanted to be safe when I rotated this image and made sure that everything was covered, and you'll see what I mean by that in a moment. The next thing I'll do is I'll select the lines, I'll go into Effect, Distort and Transform, and click on Zigzag. Then click on Preview so you can see what's going on. I'm going to move this dialog box to the side a little bit so we can see it better. And notice that Zigzag created this wavy lines. The lines are pretty sharp, but if we click on Smooth, it'll smooth out your points and it'll create more of a smooth wave. And that's what we want. Also, the height of the waves are determined by the size in pixels. So notice that if we move the size up higher to something like 82, you get really tall waves. But for our purposes, 10 pixels will be fine. Also, we can control the ridges per segment. Let me just bump that up really high so you can see what goes on. You'll notice they're just a bunch of wavy lines really close to each other. Well, we don't need them to be that close. In fact, 10 will work great for us. And you'll see how that looks here. When I'm done setting these options, I'll press OK. And I'm going to deselect my line so you can see the result there. Now I'm just going to use this one file to create all the other different files. The only difference is that I'll select the file and I'll increase the weight of my stroke if I want to make a darker engravement. Also, for the lightest shade, the very light one, I need to add one extra step, and that's a dash and gap. So if I click on this checkbox here, I can add a dash of 6 points and a gap of 2 points. And what that creates is this look here. I'm going to press Z on my keyboard to select my zoom tool, and I'm going to zoom in so you can see that better. So this is what that created. And this is going to be our 01 light layer that we added earlier into the Photoshop file. Now there's only two more things we need to do. First, we need to click on the layer and rotate it. So I'm going to click on that and I'm going to rotate it like so. And that's why I wanted to have more lines than I needed to, just to make sure it was going to cover the entire canvas. And then I'll just deselect that by clicking off here to the side of the canvas, and you'll see how these lines now are angled and are going to give us the look that we want for our engravement effect. There's only one thing I have to do now, and that's create a new shape. I'm going to click on the rectangle tool, and I'm going to create a rectangle the size of my canvas. And I'm going to remove the stroke from it, so there's no stroke and no fill. Then I'm going to select my Move tool, select them both, go into Object, Clipping Mask, Make. And that creates a clipping mask around everything that's not inside of that square, so it keeps things much cleaner. Then we can just go into File, Save As, and we can save a version for every different shade of our engravement lines. So once we save this first one, we can double click on the layer and increase the stroke size to maybe 2. And actually I'll remove the dashed lines, and then we can increase it even more for the very dark ones, so maybe something like 8 points or something like that. But anyway, this is how I created those files, and as I said before, you don't have to worry about it if you don't have Illustrator, but I still wanted to show you how they were created just in case you're wondering. Anyway, back to Photoshop now. Okay, so here we are back in Photoshop, and what I'm going to do now is bring in those other 2 files that we're missing. So that's File, Place, 04 Dark, press OK, and press Enter, and File, Place, 05 Darkest, press OK, press Enter on your keyboard, and we'll also flip this one and I'll rename it now, and then I'll go into Edit, Transform, Horizontal, and press Enter. Okay, so now we have all the shades we're going to need for our engravement, and I'm going to put them all into one group to make things simple. So I'm going to select the top and bottom layer by holding Shift. It's going to select all of them. Press Ctrl G on your keyboard, that's Command G on the Mac to make a group, and I'll just call this group Engravement. Now they're all in one group. And I'm just going to shut the visibility to all these off for now, and we're going to be turning them on one at a time. Next, on my photo layer, and by the way, notice how I sized up this image before we started the project just to save some time. If you're not using this image, you can just size it up too, and then continue with the video. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to duplicate this layer. The bottom one I'll just turn off, and for this top one, I'll add an adjustment layer. First, I'll add the hue saturation adjustment layer. I'll bring the saturation all the way down, but I don't want to affect the $100 bill. So what I'll do is I'll add a clipping mask by holding Alt or Option on your keyboard and clicking in between the 2 layers when you see the down pointing arrow with the square next to it. So the desaturation only affects the photo layer. I'll add one more, this time a curves adjustment layer, and I'll also add a clipping mask. And I'll create an S-curve so we can have a lot of contrast in that image. So this is after and that's before. Notice how this is very flat, and once we add that curves layer, it creates a lot of contrast in the image, and that's what we need. Then we'll add a Posterize adjustment layer, and this is a very interesting adjustment layer. What it does is it creates different levels, and I'll show you what I mean by that. Let me just turn off the bill layer since it's a little distracting, and I want you to concentrate more on this image, and I'll zoom in too so we can see it better. So we'll start out with 2 levels just to show you what that does. With 2 levels, you only have white and you have black. If you add 3 levels, you have white, black, and a medium gray. If we add 4 levels, then you get an extra gray, and so on and so forth. So you can bump this up to 255 and you pretty much have the same image that we had originally. And if you bring it down to 2, we have black and white. What we need for this tutorial is 5 levels. Why 5 levels? Well, we have 5 different levels in our engravement. And what we're going to do is we're going to select each level and apply a layer mask to each of these to match the photo. And it's okay if you don't understand what I mean now. As I start doing it, you'll get it. It's really not that complicated. So, actually, I'm just going to click on the photocopy, hold Shift, and click on the Posterize, press Ctrl G to put it into a group, and I'll rename this group to Sample, because we're going to be sampling from this group. And I'll add a clipping mask to the Posterize layer as well. So we have that. And we still have our original one back here. Okay. So what we're going to do now is we're going to click on the Posterize adjustment layer, click on our magic wand tool, and we're going to select the white in this layer. And by the way, let me just turn off the background since that's going to confuse the wand tool. So we only have very little white right here, right in the tip of my nose, and that's not enough. We want more white. So how do we do that? Well, we come back into our adjustment layers. We can click on the curves adjustment layer, and you can just move the curve around until we start getting more white on the nose and the cheeks and the forehead. So I'll move that just a little bit more. Okay, that seems to be working, and I'll make the dark a little bit darker to give it even more contrast. Okay, so now we have a lot more white that we can select. Now, usually by default, your wand tool is set to contiguous, and if you click on a white pixel, it's just going to select the pixels that are right next to each other. It won't select the ones that are far away. You can hold Shift and start selecting more pixels, but that will take way too long. If you uncheck contiguous and then click on those white pixels, it'll select all the white pixels automatically. Also, make sure that for this tutorial, set your tolerance to 1. Now that all the white pixels are selected, we can come down into our engraving group, turn on the very light layer, and click on it, and click on the Add Layer Mask icon. And let me just shut off the sample group just to see what that did. So then we just created a layer mask, and actually I'll turn the background too so you can see it even better. We created this pattern here from that layer mask. I'll go ahead and I'll keep doing that with every single shade. So we did white. Now we'll go into the next darkest, which is this one here. Turn that off so you can see it better. Come back down into the light, turn that layer on, add a layer mask. And there you go. You can see that a line is coming through, and then it starts breaking up in the lighter areas, much like you would see in a dollar bill. Then we'll go back to our sample, click on Posterize, and click on the next darkest gray, which is this one right here. Shut that off. Come back down into the medium flip, and add a layer mask. Now, this is half done. Why? Because it's not creating that hatching, since we only selected the gray areas. The previous light areas are not selected. So what we need to do is click on the medium adjustment layer, control click on it to select those pixels, come back down into the light area and fill that with white, and watch what happens. It creates this hatching effect that you see in engravements. Then we'll move on to the next layer, turn that on. Then we'll do that again to the next level, which is the next darkest gray, which is this one right here, right below the eyebrow. Turn that off. Come back down, turn on the dark layer, add a layer mask. And we'll do what we did before. We'll click on this new layer mask we created, control click or command click on the keyboard to select that mask. Then on the medium mask, which is 03 medium, we'll select white as our foreground color and we'll fill. You see how that made it just a little bit darker? That's what we want. We'll do the same thing for the light using the same layer mask and fill. Okay. Then we'll go back up into our sample folder, click on the Posterize layer, and now we're going to select our darkest color, and we know that the hair is black, so we can just click anywhere on the hair, turn that off, come back into the darkest flip, turn it on, add a layer mask, and we need to do what we've done with the last few layers, which is click on the layer mask, click on the layer mask below that, and fill it with white to add that hatching effect, and we'll do that with the medium and with the light, just in case, to make it just a little bit darker. So let me go ahead and zoom out just a little bit. Actually, I'll do fit to screen. And you see how that's looking. I'll zoom in just a little more, actually. You probably get a better look at it in this view here at 200%. So that's what it looks like so far. What we'll do now is we'll go into our photo layer, which is the original photo, and we'll convert that into a smart object. We'll go into Filter, Filter Gallery, and go under the Sketch folder and click on Photocopy. And by the way, make sure that your foreground set to black and your background set to white, otherwise you'll get a different result. So Filter, Filter Gallery, Sketch, and click on Photocopy. And on Detail, make sure you leave it at 1, maybe even 2, but probably not, and move the darkness all the way up, because what we want is we just want an outline of the photo. So Detail 1, darkness 50 seems to work fine, at least for this image, and then press OK. Now change the blending mode to multiply, and you get this effect here. I can take that layer and add it into the engraving group just to have it all in one layer, just to keep things organized. Then this entire engraving group, I can set that to multiply, turn on my bill layer, and remove the color overlay off my background. And we're almost done with our $100 bill. The next thing we need to do is we need to mask out the bottom part here. So what we're going to do is we're just going to select this oval here. And the easiest way to do that is to select our magic wand tool, set our tolerance to 32, and this time click on contiguous and select our bill layer, not the bill group, and just click in the middle of that oval, and it does a pretty good job. And then go into our engraving group, click on the add layer mask icon, and you get this result here. And there's one other thing we need to add, which is the background for the bill. If you notice, every dollar bill, $100 bill, or any dollar bill that you're talking about, it has some sort of background. So for this bill, we'll use another file I created in Illustrator. So I'll go into File, Place, and I'll select the file titled Squares. Press OK, and press Enter. I'll go ahead and zoom out just a little bit. And I'll select that layer again. Actually, I should have not pressed enter, but that's okay. I'm just gonna rotate it because I don't want perfect squares. I want more of a diamond look to it, and that seems to be okay. I'm gonna make a selection out of my photo, so I'll control click on that layer to make a selection around the person. And on my squares layer, I'll add a layer mask. I'll click on the layer mask and press Ctrl I to invert that layer mask, and that's the result we get. Now we're just about done with this tutorial, but there's a few things I just want to show you before I let you go, which is if you find some mistakes or some things that you're not liking, maybe you want to add more darkness in certain areas, just click on any one of these layers. So for example, on the dark layer, just with your brush tool, make sure it's not a soft brush tool, make sure it's a hard brush. You can just draw in with white to create darker sections. Actually, this one worked better, the medium one, which is the one that's flipped. You'll see how I'm creating that hatch effect now just by drawing in with white on that layer. So if you want to, you can do that to get a better result out of your image. It's totally up to you. But I just wanted to show you that. And you can do the opposite with black. You can delete some of that hatching look. So maybe you don't want that hatched look. Maybe you just want straight lines. I don't know. Whatever you want to do. I just wanted to show you those things you can do to improve on your image. And that's it for this tutorial. I hope you enjoyed it and that you learned something from it. Don't forget to subscribe to my YouTube channel and to like my Facebook page. If you like, you can head over to Facebook or my website, photoshoptrainingchannel.com, and you can share your results. I would love to see what you did. While you're there, don't forget to subscribe to my free newsletter where I do subscriber-only tutorials. Thank you for watching, and I'll talk to you guys again soon.